The Boys of St. Vincent, written by Chelsea. A. Johnson, Chapter 3. Awakening. As the school bell rang out sharply across the hostel, I watched as the boys scrambled into action, or at least tried to. Jeffrey and Noel were already dressed, sharp as usual in their neatly ironed uniforms, while Daniel, always the last to leave the dormitory, was still taking his shower, as he'd rather not shared the bathroom with anyone. Jeffrey grabbed his bag, shot me a quick glance, and nudged me. "Guy, hurry up, oh! You won't like it if Mrs. Helen Femi or schoolmaster flog us today," he said, half serious but clearly rushing. I groaned, still half asleep, trying to find the motivation to get up. Around us, the hostel was a mix of chaos and laziness. Some boys were already in their uniforms, lazily strolling towards the school gate, backpacks slung over their shoulders like they had all the time in the world. Others were still dragging themselves out of bed, moving at a snail's pace as they lazily scrubbed soap on their bodies in the open shower area. One guy, Ola, was standing and is shirtless, trying to squeeze toothpaste from an almost empty tube while still in his boxer shorts. "Ah, Guy, it's sport week again, oh," he muttered to no one in particular, as he looked at the time. In the far corner, two juniors were hastily putting on their socks, eyes wide with fear as they whispered about the impending punishment if they didn't make it to assembly on time. "I heard the senior boys are doing spot checks today," one of them said, already sweating despite the cool morning breeze. Outside, a few guys were breaking into a slow jog, not because they were in a rush, but because they wanted to avoid looking like they didn't care. "Guy, I won't kill myself," one guy, Sei, laughed as he jogged past. He was still adjusting his tie, not bothering to button his shirt properly. Amidst the chaos, Jeffrey gave me a final look, his expression serious. "Would you rather the president use you as example?" That did it. I threw on my shirt, grabbed my bag, and ran after them. By the time we reached the school gate, half the boys were still strolling in, and I spotted one senior boy with a cane, eyeing everyone like a hawk. Jeffrey glanced at me, smirking. "Next time, I won't be the one to wake you up." We had just arrived at the assembly ground, and Mrs. Helen Femi was flipping through a faxed document, scanning the list of names of students that had been grouped and regrouped. The tension in the air was palpable. As usual, Daniel strolled into the assembly with his bag casually slung over one shoulder. I couldn't help but marvel at how he managed to pull that off. Just 13 minutes ago, when Jeffrey, Noel, and I left the dorm, Daniel was still in the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, brushing his teeth in front of the mirror. His ginger hair had been a mess then, a mess that normally took him at least half an hour to gel and style perfectly. And yet, here he was, effortlessly composed, as though time waited just for him. Standing in the first line of boys, I was positioned in front of Jeffrey, who was taller than me. On the opposite line stood Noel, with Daniel right behind him, thanks to their respective heights. I turned around briefly to glance at Daniel, and he caught my eyes, giving me a reassuring nod. Embarrassed, I quickly looked away. Noel, ever observant, noticed the exchange. He shook his head lightly and turned his focus back to the announcement. Originally, the swimming groups had been paired in twos. My group was just Daniel and I kind of liked the simplicity of that setup. But that morning, as preparations began for the inter-swim competition, Mrs. Helen Femi announced a reshuffling. "Good morning, gentlemen," she greeted, her sharp voice carrying over the assembly. "Good morning, Mrs. Helen Femi," we chorused in unison. "There's been a regrouping of participants for the water boy competition," she began. "Instead of 2 persons in each group, the groups will now consist of 4 boys." The announcement was met with uproar. A murmur of complaints rippled through the crowd, and voices from the back protested loudly. "It's not fair! Silence, all of you!" the schoolmaster barked from the front row, and the assembly quickly settled down. Mrs. Helen Femi resumed reading out the new group assignments from her list. Eventually, she called out my group. "As for the last group, Daniel and Amaya, come to the front. You'll now have 2 additional members, Jeris Okafor and Sophian Drake." The crowd erupted again, this time in mockery and disbelief. "This group will definitely lose," someone jeered. "Charisse can't even handle water." Laughter rippled through the boys as Charis and Sophian walked towards us. "Miss Kapekpai, Queen Charisse," another voice mocked, drawing louder laughs. "She's scared of water." Charis, however, was unfazed. He strutted forward with the confidence of someone who had heard it all before, his hips swaying flamboyantly. "The male queen herself," came another round of taunts as the boys hurled a mix of praises and abuses. Finally, Charisse and Sophian joined Daniel and me at the front. Sophian remained calm, detached from the noise, as if he was in another world entirely. He was known to be quiet and introverted, and, like me, hydrophobic. Charisse, on the other hand, was anything but subtle. With his flamboyant personality and a wardrobe that never lacked pink, purple, blue, or yellow, he was a spectacle wherever he went. He walked with exaggerated flair, breaking strides like a runway model, unbothered by the crowd's sneers. Mrs. Helen Femi gave us one final look before addressing the group. "This is your final group," she said. "I wish all of you the best of luck. At this point, every one of you boys may now return to your classes." Charisse stepped closer to Daniel, brushing an imaginary speck of lint off his uniform. "Hi, Daniel," he said, his voice soft and sweet. Daniel gave a polite smile. "Hi, Charisse." "I'm winning this prize," Charisse declared, with a confident grin. Daniel, unruffled, replied, "I'm not worried, Charisse." His ivory complexion glowed under the morning sun, his bright smile revealing a perfect set of teeth. Charisse beamed, though his competitive spirit remained intact. "Watch me beat you hands down. I know all the rules." Daniel chuckled lightly, leaning in just enough to whisper, "Kings don't compete with queens." The statement left Charisse momentarily stunned. His eyes widened as he stammered, "Did you just call me a queen?" Daniel gave a soft nod, his aura exuding calm confidence as he walked away, leaving Charisse flustered and speechless. Sophian and I exchanged glances, struggling to contain our laughter as the group prepared for what promised to be a very eventful competition. The morning sun cast long shadows across the school grounds as I walked slowly with Sophian, my new companion. His presence was curious, intriguing even. I glanced at him and asked, "Your name is Sophia?" "That's strange because I only know girls with that name." Sophian chuckled, a soft sound that betrayed his amusement. "It's Sophian, Sophian, with the N at the end." "Oh, it has an N to make it masculine," I replied, a knowing smile creeping across my face. "Exactly," he said, his grin widening. "Otherwise, it's the same meaning, wisdom." We walked on in silence for a moment, the sound of our shoes crunching on the gravel filling the air. Behind us were Daniel, Jeffrey, and Charisse, though Daniel was slightly ahead. Around us, other boys were heading back to their classes, preparing for the day's lectures. Suddenly, a sharp voice broke through the morning calm. "Sophian! Sophian!" It was Jerome, the school's president's best friend. His voice carried authority, laced with an edge that demanded attention. We turned sharply, and there he was, striding towards us with his usual confidence. When he reached us, his stern face bore down on Sophian. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Didn't I tell you not to get too close to people? Sophian nodded quickly, his demeanor shifting to one of contrition. I'm sorry, senior, he muttered. Jerome's gaze softened slightly, but his tone remained commanding. Meet me in my dorm after class, around 7:30 p.m. Without waiting for a response, he turned to walk away, flanked by Abdul, Hakim, and their crew. Okay, senior, Sophian called out, then hurried off in the opposite direction, leaving me with my friends. Jerome's steps faltered, and he turned back, his eyes locking onto me. Stay away from him, he said, his voice low but deliberate. The warning hung in the air as he walked away with his entourage. Before I could respond, Charisse, ever bold, raised his voice. You can't just shush our friends away like that. Sophian is our friend too. Jerome stopped dead in his tracks, pivoting slowly to face Charisse. I don't hit women, he said, his words cutting like a blade. Don't make me break my rule. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Charisse stunned. Charisse's mouth hung open in disbelief. Did he just call me a woman? He asked, his voice tinged with incredulity. I exchanged glances with Jeffrey and Noel, both of whom remained silent. None of us knew what to say. Finally, Charisse broke the silence, his tone firm. You should stay away from those boys. They're bad news. His words lingered, a warning as clear as Jerome's, but filled with concern rather than authority. We resumed our walk to class, but the morning had taken on a new weight, one that none of us could quite shake. The Boys of St. Vincent. Copyright disclaimer. Copyright 2024. Chelsea Meyer Johnson. All rights reserved. This book is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and events are either products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or real events is purely coincidental. No part of this book may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the author, except in the case of brief quotations used in reviews or critical articles.